Alright, hello, welcome. This is Spargur, the budget knitter. So, I have exciting news. I've finally assembled all of the tools needed to start yarn dyeing. So, give me a second and I will show you everything that I have. Okay, so I have my masks, I have my stock pot, I have my condiment bottles, I have 6 of them for mixing the dye. I have my measuring spoons, I have my scale for if I'm going to do something that's, if I was going to split this in half, I have a scale to measure that out in grams. Then I have my citric acid, my yarn dyes, and yeah, that's pretty much everything I need. So you guys are going to go with me as I dye my first hank of yarn. Okay, so the important thing to do when dyeing yarn is that you do need to soak the hank first. So we are going to come over here to my sink. I'm breaking things. There we go. So we're just going to fill the sink with water, and then we are going to unwind our hank and we're going to soak it for about 15 to 20 minutes. And it's important, I've heard, that the water be room temperature. So I've got my sink faucet set at like perfectly in the middle. As you can see, the hank is floating in the water there, so the idea of letting it soak for about 15 to 20 minutes is that we need the yarn to be completely saturated, so it's got to be soaked all the way, and so it needs to sink into the water before we can use it. Alright, so while we're waiting for the yarn to soak, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mix our dyes. So I'm using Jacquard acid dyes. This came in a 4-pack. It's the primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, and then there's also jet black in here. So I know it's probably not the smartest thing to do, but I actually have a colorway that I'm trying to dye for a friend based on her favorite album cover. So we're actually going to try something speckled. So we're going to see how that goes. But first we have to mix the dye. Okay, so I've never mixed dye before, but what I've been told to do is you take however much you want to mix, you put the dye in here, and you put it in with some water, and then you mix it. So, about just a little under half the bottle, and I want to do kind of a light blue, so I'm going to do like, this says it's turquoise, so I'm going to try out half of an eighth of a teaspoon, I believe. And that should give me the really light blue that I'm looking for. By the way, I'm sorry for the light behind me. I don't have a choice in that. This is just how my kitchen works. Also, for dyeing, you should wear gloves. I forgot gloves, but I'm also not too worried about dye on my hands. It'll eventually come off. So we're gonna do maybe a little more than that. I don't know if you can see. So about half of an eighth. I'm gonna put that in the bottle here. Oh, that's really pretty. Okay, so then I'm going to close this up. Trying not to make a mess. Put the lid on and shake it up. Okay, so now that the dye is mixed, we are going to just wait on the yarn to finish soaking. We're about 12 or so minutes in, so we're going to give it about another 8 minutes. And I did go ahead and mix some red as well. The reason behind that is, if you know anything about the Killers, They have an album called Hot Fuss, and so I'm kind of basing it off of that album cover. And so it's kind of like a light sky blue, which is why this blue is mixed very, very lightly. And then there's some red and some black in there. And so I'm going to do some red as well, and then I'm going to do some black speckles. And I think that's going to turn out really cool. The idea is that I'm going to finish making this hank of yarn, and then I'm going to knit a hat for my friend. She's a huge Killers fan, and I thought it'd be really cool for Christmas to give her a gift that is inspired by the Killers that none of her other friends have. She's kind of part of the Killers fandom. She calls herself a victim, and whatever. Like, it's a cool thing for her, but I know it's one of her favorite things, and she's been my best friend for many, many years. So this is kind of my way to be like, hey, this is something that I'm doing for you. And to be honest, this is what I wanted to do with yarn dyeing in the first place, which was to think about things that people enjoy, and then dye yarn based on that and knit something out of it for them so that I can say, hey, I was thinking about you and I did this for you. So the dye is mixed. We are just waiting on the yarn to finish soaking, and so then after that we will pick up from there, and hopefully I get these next few steps right, because I don't want to have to end up doing this again. Alright, so the yarn is done soaking. It's been soaking for about 20 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to move it from the sink to my stock pot on the stove. Now in my stock pot I've got about 1.5 inches of water with some citric acid already kind of dissolving in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully pick up this yarn and kind of wring it out, not wring it, I'm going to just kind of get the water out of it. And then I'm going to move it over to the stock pot, and I'll show you what we're going to do from there. But this part I found is very important. So when also, since I'm not handling dye right now, I don't have to wear the mask. But, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up this yarn and I'm going to carefully just kind of string the water out like this. Alright, so then we're going to move it over to the stock pot, which is, I don't know if I'm going to be able to show this to you. We're at a struggle bus right now. I have a relatively small stock pot. It's tall, not wide, but that's fine. So one hank fits in here really well. So now what we do is we turn the stove on. And we want to slowly heat this to simmering, and then we're going to add our dye. We've got steam, and we've got a few bubbles on the bottom, but it's not quite simmering yet. We're trying to get to that simmer point, because then we're going to turn off the heat and start adding the dye. So hopefully within the next couple of minutes here, we're going to get that simmer going. So what we're looking for is like when water boils, it bubbles a lot. Well, the simmer is where it's just kind of like bubbling up a little bit here and there. And so a good indicator is around the edge of the pot where the yarn is. It'll start to bubble up around the edges or in the middle. And we don't quite have that yet. We do have a little bit of bubbles coming up, but nothing that's quite a simmer. So we're almost there, but as soon as we get to that, we're going to turn off the heat and we're going to start adding the dyes. Alright, so we have reached simmering point. We are going to turn off the heat. We're going to start applying dye to the yarn. I put my mask back on because we are going to be dealing with dye now. So this is the yarn. Now I want the blue to be the main color, so we're going to apply that for most of it. So we've exhausted that. Okay, so what I did is I put it in 3 main places, and then sprinkled it some other places, and then I put it directly down in the middle because I want it to soak down to the yarn underneath. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some red, and this is going to be kind of lighter because this is going to bleed through a lot more. Right, I was really hoping the red was going to be kind of lighter, but it doesn't appear that that's going to be the case. So I think that's all that I'm going to do on red. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add jet black speckles. So I'm going to grab some dye, I'm going to put it on a spoon, and then from afar you can watch me apply that. I'm going to do it the way Hugh Loco did it. So we're going to do that by putting it on a spoon and then just lightly tapping it over the yarn to give it a nice speckled look. Okay, so now we're going to get some of the black. I put a little bit in my tablespoon, and then we're going to put that in the big spoon. It's kind of clumpy, so I'm going to like break it up. I know you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm telling you what I'm doing. Okay. The funny thing is the jet black dye looks brown, but it's not. So we're just gonna lightly tap. Alright, I think that's going to be great. So we're just going to let that sit. The idea here is that this has to cool back down to room temperature before I can take it out. So we're just going to let that sit for a minute. And then the next thing we're going to do is when it's cooled all the way back down to room temperature, which is probably going to take a while, we're going to actually move it to the sink. We're going to rinse it out using some soap. I don't have wool wash, but we are going to use just regular dish soap. I've seen people use that a lot. So we're going to rinse that out, and we're going to try and get the yarn to run clear, the water that runs out of the yarn to run clear. And then hopefully we used enough citric acid. I did use quite a bit, so hopefully that's going to help this stick. And then we will move it over to the sink, and then we'll rinse it out, and then from there we'll get as much of the water out as we can, and then we'll hang it up to dry, and hopefully by tomorrow morning I'll have a finished tank to show you. So by the time you're watching this, I'll have finished it, and there should be a picture of the finished tank at the end of this. But for now, we're just going to let this cool, and we'll come back, and I'll join you when it's time to rinse it out. Alright, so I helped the process along a little bit. So what I did is I carefully put the pot in the sink and then put the room temperature water around it to help the water cool. Not too fast, just a little bit faster. Mainly because I'm actually running out of time tonight and I need to have this hanging up to dry before I go to bed, which is soon. So again, what I did is I put the pot, it was only sort of warm when I put it in here, but I just put the room temperature water around it so that we could get that cooled down. So this is cool. I can stick my finger in it and it's perfectly fine. It's only slightly warmer than room temperature. Normally I would wait, but since this is my first skein, I'm not like too worried about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pot out, and I'm going to put it right next to the sink. Now, I watched somebody do this before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little soap here in the water and try to get it kind of sudsy. Might get a little bit more than that. because what we're going to do now is we're going to wash the dye out of the yarn, any excess dye, because we don't want that, of course, coming off on our fingers or on your head or wherever you end up using the yarn. And then also it's going to add a much better scent to it. I had never smelled wet wool before, and I'm not a fan. It's not the greatest smell in the world. So the idea here is that we're going to quickly move this yarn from the pot to the sink that has room temperature water and soap in it. I'm just using Gain dishwashing liquid because I haven't been able to get wool wash yet, but I've been told that this will work just fine. Really, the lanolin is more, the lanolin that's in wool wash is made to soften the yarn, but this has a moisturizer in it, and it actually, this is what I use to soften my acrylic, so it'll work just the same. So I'm going to carefully scoop this out because remember I've got that speckled stuff sitting on top and we don't want that to spread too much. So we're going to pick it up and put it down in the water, rinse, drain, and then continue to rinse until the water runs clear. So I'm going to dip my hand on one side and the other. Alright, so now what we're going to do is going to put some soap on my hands, and we're just going to press the soap into the yarn, get all that excess dye out. Squeeze this out, so we want this water to run clear. Room temperature, a little bit more soap. Don't want it too sudsy. Just gonna put that back in here. Oh, we've got a piece. Yeah. So we're just gonna press again, trying to get any extra dye out. The idea here is you don't want to twist. You don't want to like wring it, you just want to press to get any excess dye out. Okay. So that's getting clearer. Alright, I've gotten most of the water squeezed out, and you can kind of tell, at least now I can kind of tell when it's sort of dry, because the yarn is, or when most of the water's out, because the yarn is actually kind of dry. Not completely, it's not completely dry, but it is sort of dry. So now the next step is to go hang this up to continue drying overnight, and then the next thing you should see from me is a picture of the completed hank. Now, again, I know this wasn't really much of like a tutorial. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to take you kind of along on this journey as I tried to dye my first skein of yarn. And to be honest, I am actually very thrilled with how this turned out. I didn't think it was going to turn out as good as it did because it looked kind of patriotic there at the beginning. But I think this has turned out exactly kind of what I had in mind. And I'm actually really excited to get this to dry, hank it up, and then I've got a ball winder coming on the way, and then I will ball it I will wind it into a ball, and then I will knit it into a hat for my friend who inspired this hank. By the way, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but I call this colorway Hot Fuss, F-U-S-S. Inspired by the Killers album by the same name. So I'm really excited about this. Also, I want to let you know that I dyed this this yarn. Oh, I lost the ball band. This is 100% Peruvian Highland wool. And I believe this is the sock base, actually, or the sock thickness. So that is this yarn that I dyed, and if I can find the ball band here again soon, I will actually put that information in the description box below so that you can see exactly what I dyed, and then you can kind of see how it turned out, because I have been told that different types of yarn take dye up in different ways. So I'm actually really thrilled with how this turned out. And hopefully, soon you'll be seeing a finished object using this yarn. So, thank you for joining me for this. I'm still squeezing water out of it. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you guys again here soon on the Budget Knitter Podcast channel. Thanks!